Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker with kind of a special edition of Let's Talk Tropics. I'm going to do one during the morning and one during the latter part of the afternoon. We've just got the 9 o'clock update, so I've got all the current information here for you. Got a championship swim meet to run later this afternoon, so that's why the noon show will not be happening live, but you get a bonus show this time around. You get one in the morning and one in the evening. Real quick, I did want to show you that we've got a couple of severe thunderstorm warnings, one that's over Calcasieu as well as western part of Jeff Davis Parish. And we've also got a tornado warning. Now, this is being recorded here right before the 9 o'clock hour. You can see we got a tornado warning that's going to be in effect until 9:30, and that's going to be for the areas there over central and northern parts of Evangeline Parish. And then we've got another severe thunderstorm warning that's here. This one's going to be in effect until 9:45, and it looks like we could see some wind gusts getting up to as high as 60 miles per hour. There are other thunderstorms that are out there, and we'll probably see at least a little chance for some of these going severe, especially over the western half of Acadiana. Bigger thunderstorms that are off to the west over portions of Texas most likely will start to weaken as they move off toward the east. That's all part of a big trough that's digging across the west. Secondary trough is going to kind of spin out there and kind of get cut off, and that may be dealing with Rafael, which is still remaining as a tropical storm. As far as the Gulf of Mexico, things are still a bit on the rough side, and of course winds and seas will be higher around those thunderstorms, but the winds out of the southeast about 15 to 20 and seas getting up to about 5 feet. Winds and seas, of course, will be higher around those scattered showers and thunderstorms. So a quick look at what we've got going on across the Atlantic Basin. Of course, Tropical Storm Rafael in the western part of the Caribbean Sea. And then we've got a slight chance for some development there across the Bahamas or the northern Caribbean islands. A little bit farther down the road is a bit more of a tropical wave is going to be kind of sliding in. That tropical wave, by the way, is out here over the Atlantic Ocean out here. So that might be something new later on. And then, of course, we've got Rafael right there in the middle part of the Caribbean Sea. It is still holding with winds at 60 miles per hour, and the 9 o'clock coordinates are there on the left-hand side of your screen. 17.8 north, 76.6 west, or rather 78.6 west. Winds are at 60, and that pressure is holding at about 994, which is actually up just a tick from the 6 o'clock advisory. And there's a closer view. A little better organization out there today compared to what we saw yesterday. And there over the far western portion of the Caribbean Sea, we've got some very warm water temperatures and also some high heat content and very little wind shear in that particular area. So the forecast is to bring Rafael to a hurricane sometime later today, and hurricane warnings are posted now for western Cuba as well as the Cayman Islands. And there's the forecast cone. And the forecast confidence on track is pretty high for the first 2 to 2.5 days. And then after that, the models really go all over the place because we don't know how strong the ridge to the east or the trough to the west will be. And then on top of that, as Rafael moves into a more hostile environment over the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico, it's not real certain how vertically stacked this is going to be. If it doesn't get a good vertical stack, then it's not going to be influenced by the trough nor the high pressure ridge off toward the east. But if it's a little bit stronger, some of those mid-level winds can help to intensify or at least drive it in a different direction. As far as any further strengthening, though, toward the northern Gulf Coast, that seems a bit more unlikely. So that's why I'm not super concerned with Tropical Storm Rafael, at least at this point. But again, look at the track models. They're great day 1 and day 2. And then after day 3, they kind of spin out all over the place because of the positions of different areas of low or high pressure that are west and east of this. But again, it's all going to be dependent on how strong the system is too. The stronger the hurricane, the easier it is for it to be picked up by a trough. The weaker, then it won't be affected as much, and it may just do kind of a westward drift. But at least for the next 24 to 72 hours, most of our computer models are going high-end tropical storm or low-end hurricane here, category 1 at best. A couple of them go stronger than that, but really you want to look at where most of the models are lying in here between days 1 and days 3 there, between 24 and 72 hours. We're looking at the possibility of a hurricane, but then as it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, in this particular area here, you see weakening And that has nothing to do with land, at least for most of these models. It just is weakening out in the Gulf of Mexico, and hopefully this will dissipate before it gets here. But there is the expected arrival of winds. If we're going to get any tropical storm force winds along the Gulf Coast of Louisiana, it's not going to come until sometime very late this week. So we've got a lot of time to watch this as it moves off toward the northwest. So there's a quick look at the HWRF from this morning. It is indicating a hurricane for a while, and then it really starts to drop off once it gets into the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico. But notice as it continues to weaken, it doesn't get picked up by any trough and continues to move off toward the west. So that's one scenario there. The HAFS model brings it a little bit closer to the northern Gulf Coast, but it also shows a considerable amount of weakening as it heads toward the northern Gulf Coast. And even on this, it's really just kind of washing out to a tropical depression by the time it reaches the coast somewhere between Louisiana and the Florida Panhandle. Global models also are indicating some weakening. The GFS still is kind of pinpointing southeastern Louisiana to the Florida Panhandle, but considerable weakening as it moves off toward the north. And then the Euro model from earlier this morning is really kind of following in about the same. Decent weakening after it moves away from Cuba, and as it does, it drifts a little bit farther more toward the west and not picked up by that trough as it will be in a weakened form. As far as the Canadian model, it is the fastest of all of them, reaching the Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama coastline sometime late Friday going into Saturday, but notice it also tends to weaken as it gets closer to the northern Gulf Coast. And the Icon model is very similar, strengthening for a while, and then once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, it weakens and moves off toward the west, which is a little more like what we're seeing with the European model. So where we're going to stop here is early Saturday morning. The GFS has a bit of a low pressure area, but it's in much weakened form here right off of the Louisiana coastline and continuing to weaken as it moves off toward the north. The Euro model keeps this out in the Gulf of Mexico, at least this run that we're looking at right now. The Canadian model already has it dissipating and moving onshore of Louisiana, Mississippi. And the Icon model has it kind of drifting off toward the west into the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico. But I did want to show you also, notice on the Icon, we've got another low out here, which possibly could be that tropical wave. The Canadian model also on day 5 has a bit of a ripple of low pressure here over the eastern Bahamas, which possibly could be Sebastian. The Euro isn't too turned on by that, but the GFS also has a bit of a low there over the Bahamas by day 5, so there's a possibility we could be seeing a second tropical system coming in behind Rafael. As I said, those water temperatures are quite warm over the western part of the Caribbean Sea, and the tropical cyclone heat potential is still maxed out in those areas. So don't be surprised if you see some quick intensification between now and by the time it reaches Cuba, and it could hold its own there over the central part of the Gulf of Mexico if it can make it to the loop current, but after that, it's not going to be seeing any favorable conditions for any strengthening, and weakening is actually forecast. And there's a lot of wind shear here along the northern Gulf Coast, but where the system is currently positioned, there are some areas of low to moderate wind shear, so it has a chance for some extra development here over the next 24 to 36 hours. But then as we get into Saturday, notice how the wind shear here along the northern part of the Gulf Coast really starts to amplify here. So it's not going to have a whole lot of a chance to get any stronger. It would maintain its strength or possibly weaken, and I think weakening is the more likely scenario for Rafael as it gets closer to the northern Gulf Coast, if it indeed does, because again, the models after day 3 kind of go all over the place, anywhere from just drifting west toward Texas or lifting northward toward the northern Gulf Coast. As I said, Sebastian is a possibility going into next week. We will get a new global tropics hazard outlook this afternoon, and I will have that on the afternoon version of Let's Talk Tropics later today. But you can see going into the remainder of this week and even next week, this particular model is keeping the western part of the Caribbean a bit on the busy side here for the next couple of weeks. So November usually a slower month, but obviously this hurricane season has a lot of different ideas. Well, I'm going to be back later on after the 3 o'clock advisory. So like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on that notification too. That way you know when the next video comes down later in the day. Don't forget, you can still hear all of my forecasts on Big 102.1, 106.7 Planet Radio, and Freedom 95.1. And I will be updating any severe weather or any new updates on Rafael on my social media pages throughout the day between this broadcast and my broadcast a little later this afternoon. Again, it's going to be after 3-ish sometime, after that 3 o'clock advisory comes down. So don't miss that later on today. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Stay safe, and I'll have another look at all this coming up after 3 o'clock later this afternoon right here on Acadiana Weather Today. See you then.